All right, so this is our first video on the integumentary system, so the skin. So we're going to start by talking about the functions of the skin. So the skin has many different important functions. So let's just go through a few and kind of talk about them, discuss them. So one big function would be temperature regulation. All right, and so we know that temperature is regulated by sweating on one end, all right? And so sweat glands are located in the skin, and so the sweat produced in the skin helps to cool off the body and regulate temperature. The skin, I think the most obvious function would be for protection. All right, so the skin provides protection from abrasion because it has that keratinized, stratified squamous tissue that helps to really protect against any kind of cuts or anything like that from an outside source. All right, the skin also functions in sensation. So it has, whoops, I'm erasing things accidentally. All right, so it has nerve endings that can sense things. So sensation is a really important function of skin. Touch, vibration, that kind of thing can be detected by the skin. Pain obviously can be detected by the skin. So it's important for sensation. It functions in excretion. All right. So excretion, one way would be through sweat. So there are going to be some waste products in sweat that can be excreted. And then also oil is secreted onto the skin. And so that would be, here we go. So oil and sweat, all right, for excretion. Okay, the skin plays a vital role in vitamin D synthesis. Okay, because vitamin D, in order to be fully activated, must be exposed to sunlight, and that happens in the skin. And so vitamin D is really important for calcium absorption from your food that you eat, right? So in order to activate that vitamin D and be able to absorb calcium from your food, that vitamin D needs to be activated by sunlight, and that happens in the skin. All right, and the skin also is involved in blood flow regulation. Okay, and so with the skin, when internal organs, vital organs need more circulation, that blood from the skin can be kind of rerouted internally. And so that's why somebody who is maybe hemorrhaging, their skin itself will feel cold and clammy because that blood that was in their skin is now being moved to their internal organs, which is more important that those organs receive blood. So you can kind of reroute the blood to the vital organs. And so that's why somebody who's hemorrhaged will feel cold or clammy because that blood's being moved more internally. All right, and so you can also, in a medical situation, kind of monitor somebody's blood flow and the oxygenation of their blood by looking at their skin, particularly in areas where the skin is a little thinner, so like the fingernails and the lips. You can see more of a pink color means that the blood flow is better, and then if it starts to get really pale, that'll tell you maybe there's some kind of circulation problem. Okay, all right, good. So those are general functions of the skin. So now let's start talking about the anatomy of the skin. All right, so all the different layers of the skin. So we're going to start from the outside, and we're going to work our way in. All right, so the outermost layer of the skin is the epidermis. And so if we're looking at this picture down here of the skin, so the epidermis would be here. All right, so this would be the epidermis. Okay, and so the epidermis, the epithelium that is found there is called keratinized. Keratinized, stratified squamous. All right, remember it has that layer of keratinized cells on the top that provide that extra protection. All right, so skin, the epithelium of skin is keratinized, stratified squamous. All right, and so let's talk about, there are, in addition to those epithelial cells, there's going to be a lot of other cells involved in that epidermis and that keratinized stratified squamous tissue. So let's talk about all the cells that we can find there. All right, so our first type of cell is a keratinocyte. And so these are cells that make keratin. All right, they make keratin, and keratin is a protein. Okay, so keratin, this is a protein, and its function is to protect and to waterproof. All right, so it protects and it waterproofs. And waterproofs, which is a really important function of the skin, is that it waterproofs the outside of the body, so we won't lose moisture through the skin. We have that kind of waterproof layer sealing moisture in. Okay, and so these keratinocytes make keratin and they fill up themselves with keratin. And so as those cells move towards the surface of the epidermis, they're going to be more and more filled with keratin until they're on that top keratinized layer where they're just essentially plasma membrane filled with keratin. Okay, so they fill with keratin as they move up. All right, and so cells, as they mature in the epidermis, they move from the lower layers, the deeper layers, they move up towards the surface as they move up. Okay, so those are our keratinocytes. These are those cells that are making the keratin. They're eventually going to become that top keratinized layer of the epidermis. All right, and so between these cells, these keratinocytes, we would have desmosomes, right, providing strength, and we would also have tight junctions. As we said, waterproofing is really important, so tight junctions to keep that waterproof. All right, so this is our epidermis. Also in the epidermis, we have melanocytes. All right, we're going to talk about these a little more towards the end of this chapter, but melanocytes make melanin. All right, melanin is a pigment in skin. Okay, and so we can see, if we look right here, this would be a melanocyte right here, right? And so they'll make melanin and deposit those melanin pigment molecules into the actual skin cells. Okay, and so that will give skin its pigment. The more melanin that is present, right, the darker the skin will appear. If you have patches of melanin, kind of concentrated areas, that would be like a freckle. All right, so we'll talk about those towards the end of the chapter. Okay. Also in the epidermis, we have Langerhans cells, sometimes also called dendritic cells. And so these cells are phagocytes in the epidermis. All right. Whoops. And so that means that they kind of clean things up. They eat debris and bacteria and stuff like that in the epidermis. All right. So these are phagocytes. And so they're going to kind of clean up debris and bacteria. And so they are kind of a cell that's a branch off of the immune system, right? So they were originally white blood cells that kind of moved out into the skin. And so now they're just going to live in the skin and remove debris and bacteria. All right. And then our last type of cell in our epidermis that you guys should know are called Merkel Discs or tactile cells. They go by both names. And so these are going to be touch receptors. All right. And generally the way I think about touch receptors in the skin is the closer the receptor is to the surface of the skin, right? So like these would be in the epidermis, the more sensitive, right? So these would be kind of like these little guys here. You can kind of see extending the little nerve branches into the epidermis. So the more sensitive they're going to be to very, very light touch. The deeper the receptor is in the skin, that would be more for pressure. So you would need more pressure to activate those receptors. So these Merkel discs, because they're in the epidermis, they would detect a lighter kind of touch. All right. And so they're going to be part of the nervous system. All right. So they're going to send that information about touch to the nervous system. Okay, so that is our epidermis. The epidermis is made up of many different layers. You guys only need to know for my class 2 specific layers. All right, and so the first layer is the bottom layer. That's the stratum basale. So it is a single layer of cells along the bottom here. So they're kind of blue, right? But it's just going to be one layer of cells on the bottom. All right. This is a layer of cells on the bottom of the epidermis. All right. So they sit right at that basement membrane, and their function is mitosis. Okay. So they are the only cells, right? Only cells in the stratum basale can undergo mitosis. So these are the cells that are dividing to make new skin cells. All right. So the job of the stratum basale is mitosis and making new skin cells. So we make the new skin cells at the bottom, and then they, as they mature and grow and fill with keratin, they move towards the surface. Okay, so that stratum basale is where that mitosis occurs. And then the second layer you should know is the stratum corneum. So this is the very, very top layer. And so the stratum corneum, this is going to be at the top. All right, and it is going to be full of dead keratinized cells just lining the top. All right, so dead cells full of keratin. Okay, so those are the basically plasma membrane surrounding keratin, or filled with keratin. Okay, so if we're looking here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. All right, so once we get towards the top, we start to get all these cells that don't have nuclei, right? That's going to be our stratum corneum. Okay, and so typically, if you're looking at an actual microscope slide, you can actually see a lot of these cells are kind of like sloughing off, right, and detaching. That's also characteristic of the stratum corneum because those dead cells are shed very easily as well. Okay, so that's our epidermis. So between the stratum basale and the stratum corneum, there are many other layers. We're not going to go into them. There's the stratum spinosum, the stratum lucidium, the stratum granulosum. But you only need to know the top and the bottom layers and why they're important for your exam. All right. Okay, so that's our epidermis. That's our top layer of the skin. Below the epidermis, we have the dermis. All right. So if I were to kind of box it in on this drawing, right, it would be from here all the way down to right about here, right? All of that is dermis. And then we can break the dermis down into 2 separate layers of its own. Okay, so let's talk about the dermis. It sits directly under the epidermis. Okay, and so the first part of the dermis is called the papillary region. All right. And so the papillary region is kind of the top 1/5 of the dermis. All right. So this is the top 1/5. And it is made up of primarily areolar connective tissue. All right. So this is areolar. So it's going to have lots of blood vessels, right? This is where the dermis connects to that basement membrane, right? So connects to the basement membrane of the epidermis. All right, so basement membrane of epidermis. Okay, and so with that papillary layer, it contains these dermal papillae, and so you're going to see the word papillae throughout A and P. And so what the term papillae means is it's a projection. So it's often referred to as like a nipple-like projection. And so what you can see, if we look here, this papillary layer, right, is very wavy like this, right? And so all of these little waves like this would be one dermal papillae. This would be another dermal papillae. That would be another dermal papillae. Okay, and so these are the projections of the dermis. All right, and so that is where the dermis meets with the epidermis. So those dermal papillae, right, on top of them would be where that basement membrane would be located that connects it to the epidermis. All right, so they're folds of that dermal, of that dermis, of that papillary region. Okay, and so you can see kind of, if we're looking here, right, this would be our papillary region here, and we kind of shift to a different kind of tissue, right, that looks much more fibrous here, right? So that would be our next region. Okay, so in the papillary region, still that top 1/5, we have a structure called a Meissner Corpuscle. All right, and so the Meissner Corpuscle is just another type of touch receptor. All right, so it would be integrated with the nervous system, and this is a touch receptor. Okay, that's located in the papillary region of the dermis. Okay, and so then underneath that papillary region, we have the reticular region. So from here down, this would be the reticular region. The reticular region is made up of dense, irregular connective tissue. All right, so dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so this is very tough, right? Remember, dense, irregular provides strength in many different directions. Also found in this region, we're going to talk about towards the end of this chapter, there's going to be a lot of accessory structures. So you can see some glands here, hair follicles here. One thing I will point out we have here is called a it's called a Pacinian Corpuscle. This is another type of touch receptor, right? This would be a deeper touch receptor, so more involved in sensing pressure than light touch. All right, so this would be a deep touch receptor. Okay, and a lot of times, like if you're looking at lab models, these Pacinian corpuscles, they're also called lamellated corpuscles. They look kind of like onions when you cut them, so they have kind of these layers, right, all built in on each other. So that's our Pacinian corpuscle, located in the reticular region of the dermis. Okay. All right, and so then our last layer we're going to include here, it is not technically part of the skin. It's underneath the skin, but it's always kind of discussed with the skin, and that's the hypodermis. All right, the hypodermis goes by many different names. So hypodermis, subcutaneous tissue, and also superficial fascia. Those are all names for the hypodermis. And so it is under the dermis. All right, it is made up of adipose tissue and some areolar tissue kind of mixed in with that. Okay, so if we look here, right, we have our dermis ends right about here. And so all this yellow would be adipose tissue, and we have some kind of areolar tissue mixed in between it. Okay, so the hypodermis contains primarily adipose tissue, and there'll be some areolar tissue along there with it. All right, and so the function of this hypodermis is for cushioning and protection. All right. Okay, and it kind of insulates and provides, kind of keeps, heat in. It provides that layer of protection. All right, so that's the hypodermis, underneath the dermis. All right, so now let's talk about skin color and what pigments give skin its color. All right, so you're probably familiar most with melanin, but it is not the only pigment that determines what color our skin is. Okay, so melanin is the major one that we talk about. So let's talk about it first. All right, so melanin, as we said before, is made by melanocytes. All right. So those melanocytes sit there making melanin and depositing it into the skin cells. Interesting thing about melanocytes and how they affect skin color is that between different skin tones, everybody has the same number of melanocytes. What determines your skin tone, right, a lighter skin versus a darker skin tone, is how much melanin each of those cells make. So we all have the same number of melanocytes. Some melanocytes are just making more melanin than others are, which is kind of like a really fascinating thing to think about. Okay, so melanocytes are making that melanin, depositing it. The function of melanin is for UV protection. All right, and so we want to protect ourselves from UV damage from the sun, from the UV rays, because UV rays can damage DNA. All right, and so it's really important to, especially those cells in the stratum basale, right, that undergo mitosis, we want to protect those from the damaging rays of the sun. Because if the sun damages the DNA, that could lead to skin cancer. All right, especially if it damages the DNA in those stratum basale cells that are undergoing mitosis, that could lead to skin cancer. All right, so melanin has a very important function. And so a couple of things associated with melanin, like we said, freckles were kind of a concentrated area of melanin. You can also see a couple other conditions associated with melanin. So one is vitiligo. So with vitiligo, you have patches of skin that lack pigmentation, right? All right, so they lack that melanin. And so this is caused by an autoimmune condition. All right, so this is autoimmune, which means that your immune system is attacking your own body cells. And so in this case, the immune cells would be attacking melanocytes, and it's usually isolated to certain areas. And so this is caused by an autoimmune condition versus albinism, which is a genetic condition. All right. And so this person lacks melanin altogether. And so there's a genetic problem with the gene for melanin. And so they don't make any melanin. All right, so they lack melanin. All right, and so this is genetically based. Okay. All right, so that's melanin. That's the first of 3 pigments that determine skin color. Okay, so melanin has kind of a brownish color to it, a brown hue to it. And so then we have carotene, all right, which is another pigment in skin. And so carotene has kind of an orange color to it, right? So it's an orange pigment. And it deposits in the stratum corneum. Okay, and so we obtain carotene from the food that we eat, and it's associated with vitamin A rich food. All right, so it's associated with vitamin A, and so foods like carrots, I mean things that are orange, carrots, butternut squash, things like that have a lot of carotene. So if you eat large quantities of those, you can increase the amount of carotene in your stratum corneum, and that actually will give your skin more of a kind of orangish hue. All right, so that's another pigment in skin. And then lastly, hemoglobin is a pigment that can affect skin tone and skin color. All right, so hemoglobin is in your blood, right? So this is the pigment in blood. Okay, and so it's what gives blood that bright ruby red color when hemoglobin is bound to oxygen. All right, so when hemoglobin is bound to oxygen, it's bright red. When it's not bound to oxygen, it's not blue. It's actually like a really, really dark, dark, dark red. All right, so dark, dark red blood is deoxygenated, and bright, scarlet red blood is oxygenated. Okay, so it has a red hue. The actual color it gives to the skin is more of a pink hue. All right, so it gives skin a pink color. Okay, and so depending on the type of skin, so the thicker the skin, generally the less of the hemoglobin you'll be able to see through the skin. So when skin is thick, you have a thicker layer of stratum corneum, so that keratinized tissue. And so the thinner the skin, the more easily you can see that tissue underneath, right? Or that blood underneath, sorry. Because remember, this whole layer, the epidermis, has no blood vessels. Okay, so thick skin, like in the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, is going to have a very thick stratum corneum layer, which will make it a little harder to see your blood flow underneath that epidermis. Okay, and so the oxygenation of the blood can affect the color of the skin. And so when blood is not properly oxygenated, it can give the skin a bluish color. And so that's called cyanosis. All right, so it gives a blue color to the skin when that blood isn't well oxygenated due to low oxygen. Okay. That's also something really important to keep in mind when you're working in the medical field is, and especially looking in areas where the skin is very thin in the lips and in the fingernails, where you can more easily see blood flow, to kind of monitor oxygenation of the blood. Okay, so we're going to stop there for this video, and so then in the next one we'll pick up talking about accessory structures of the skin. So this would be the hair, the nails, different glands, and that sort of thing.